Welcome to Flight Club. We take off soon. Make yourself comfortable. We recommend getting a drink and headphones. Yes, headphones are essential. The first rule about Flight Club is you do talk about Flight Club. The second rule about Flight Club is you do talk about Flight Club. This flight will never stop. Welcome to Flight Club. Welcome to Flight Club. This flight will never stop.
Flight Club. Flight Club. Flight Club. Flight Club.
Welcome to Flight Club. We take off soon. Make yourself comfortable. We recommend getting a drink and headphones. Yes, headphones are essential. The first rule about Flight Club is you do talk about Flight Club. The second rule about Flight Club is you do talk about Flight Club. This flight will never stop. This flight will never stop. Welcome to Flight Club. We take off soon. Welcome to Flight Club. This flight will never stop.
Hello everyone and welcome to Flight Club. My name is Klaus Leopold and I'm the co-host of this show, and we have a fantastic guest today. But before we talk about the guest, co-host.
Hello, everyone, and welcome. My name
Sorry,
is
I was
Cliff.
muted again.
It's all good. We hear you fine now, so that's a good thing. Cool. So welcome, everyone. As Klaus says, we have a wonderful guest this evening. We have Melissa Perri joining us, and we will be talking about. Well, I guess it's not so new a book, but I guess given the amount of energy and effort that goes into writing the book, and I was following the journey right from the beginning. I think it's definitely worthy of continuing to be celebrated long after it has been published. So, yes, let's meet Melissa. Melissa, can you tell us just a little bit about yourself and what is it that you do in the world? What gets you excited?
What do I do these days? I think I am excited about making better product leaders, let's put it that way. And everything that I do kind of goes towards that. So how do we make great product managers who turn into great product leaders? And that's what I'm passionate about. So they can make great products out in the world that are great for their customers. So a lot of great in there. What do I do to do that? The last 8 years, I was consulting with a lot of teams to set up their product management organizations. I played an interim CPO role for a bunch of them as well, set strategy, help them scale, help them hire chief product officers. I did that across like hundreds of companies for a long time. And this year, I kind of pulled back a little bit on that. And I'm focusing more of my energy on teaching because I think that's where I can provide greater leverage to people. So I teach in a variety of places. I started an online school for product managers called Product Institute in 2016. That's still running. It's all pre-recorded videos for people getting into product management and helping people who've got a good firm baseline understanding also level up with some extra classes. I also started a CPO Accelerator last year. It's been 1 year in the making. It's exciting. For VPs of products who are becoming chief product officers. And that's more of like a hands-on live class where we have a lot of networking components to that as well. And then I also teach at Harvard Business School. So that's where I am right now. I teach the second year MBA students about product management 101 and 102. So I'm currently revamping that curriculum, and we get a lot of people who want to be product leaders or product founders in those classes. So that's where I teach them.
Very cool. So just before we get into too much conversation about the topics we're going to discuss, for those of you who maybe are just meeting some of us for the first time, we actually all know each other from the past. Melissa and I have spent a fair amount of time hanging out in New York. When I was at Spotify, we used to just trade war stories, I guess, about different things that were happening. And we were actually saying a few minutes ago, we realized that the last time the three of us were all together in the same place was in Dubai. Quite a few years ago, we actually did a sort of speaking session, all three of us together for a company that side. So yeah, many years since we were all in the same place. So it's nice to be virtually reconnected and to be able to see each other's faces and bounce along to some music and have an interesting conversation this evening. So yeah, thank you for joining us again this evening. It's nice to hang out with you. Quick questions, couple of Sorry, I think I'm getting a little bit of latency. I don't mean to talk over you. Sorry about that. My internet. I found out this afternoon that my fiber is actually getting installed during today because the guys arrived to start digging up my driveway unannounced. So this was a surprise, but a fairly good one. So next episode, hopefully, I have better internet and I stop interrupting people. Cool. So before we jump into the topics and start discussing some questions, for those of you who are joining us for the first time on Flight Club, we do this about every 2 weeks, and the format, as you will see, is basically something like a panel discussion, a little bit of Q&A. So I encourage you, ask your questions in the chat. We will try to weave the topics that you raise and the questions that you ask into the conversation. So we try to make it as interactive as possible. The second thing to mention is that if you like what we're doing, it would be super cool if you hit the like and the subscribe button. You will get notifications about new videos. This video will be available and you can reshare it straight after we finish broadcasting. So yeah, I'll tell you a little bit more about Flight Club and some of the other things a little bit later on. But let's talk a little bit about Melissa and her interesting ideas. So I think some of you might have seen that Melissa has published a book called Escaping the Build Trap. And I read this very shortly after it was released, actually, and I thoroughly enjoyed the book. I recommend it actually fairly often. It's on my sort of standard recommendations list, specifically for people who are getting into product management or trying to understand how kind of out of the space you describe in the book of being stuck in a build trap, right? So I'm wondering if, for those who haven't read the book or maybe not familiar with this topic, could you give us just a little bit of a sense? When you say build trap, what do you mean by a build trap? What is this trap? What is it about? Yeah.
Yeah. So when I think about the build trap, I'm basically describing a state that companies get into where we're focused more on building tons of features than really figuring out what's the right features to build. And I think every company does go through this at one point. I don't want to say it's just like all the bad companies or big companies or anything like that. It's just like I've seen startups do it. I've seen growth stage companies do it. I've seen really large companies do it. But it's characterized really by like getting so caught up in we just have to ship a lot of things and not taking the step back to really align it back to strategy and figuring out if it's the right thing to build. Really questioning like, why are we doing the things that we're actually doing?
Turns out I get stuck on the mute button still for some reason. Sorry about that. Yeah, so I this topic really resonated with me, and I think well done on picking such a wonderfully catchy title for a book. I mean, Escaping the Build Trap. It's fantastic. So I see this often in the organizations that I work with. I mean, I've seen it at teams, or from Spotify to the clients that I work at, and exactly like you say, at times people just kind of getting stuck in this thing of like, well, we just need more people, or we need to deliver more stuff, and this kind of thing. So if that's the trap that people get stuck in, what is kind of I don't know, maybe it's a bit early to sort of start defining a solution, but like, what is it that we actually want instead of being in the build trap? Like, what does an alternative or better state look like?
Yeah, it's really being discerning about what you're building and making sure that it's giving the right outcomes to the company and to your users that you actually want. So when a company is not stuck in the build trap, what they're doing is they're basically looking at like, where do we want to go in 5 to 10 years? How are we going to get there? Where are we placing our bets? How do we be strategic about that? And they're really limiting their work in progress towards those goals. They're testing, they're learning, they're measuring outcomes, they're measuring success metrics, and they're doing that against like business metrics and customer outcomes instead of just by the number of stuff that they ship. So it's really about like not doing everything you could possibly do. It's more about doing the right things and choosing the right things and being really thoughtful about what's going to be the stuff that we do invest in to get there. And I think if you do it that way as well, like one, you're going to get there faster. You're going to get to your goals faster. You're not going to be spending so much time swirling. Two, your company is going to scale better. I see a lot of teams think like, hey, I just need to hire like 7,000 people to go execute on all of these projects. And that's not really the case. Like not all of those projects are going to pan out. So instead, if you're thinking back towards like strategically, what could we do? It gives you a lot more leverage to use the people that you have and grow slowly, or you can even grow rapidly, but you're investing in the right things and you're getting the right outcomes. You're not just having a ton of people working on things that won't result in any measurable progress for anybody.
Yeah. I think that resonates because I think often what we find is both in our personal capacities, but also kind of in a business context, we realize at some level that some of the things that we do have a huge return, and others maybe have a slightly smaller return for the same amount of effort. And so for me, it's a little bit of that. Like we know that there's a sort of a different distribution. Not everything is equal. So the question is, well, how do we get better at picking kind of the more beneficial or the better outcome or the higher impact, or whatever it is in your context kind of thing. I'm wondering, from your experience, why is it, do you think, that people get stuck in this build trap? Like, why do we have this tendency to sort of stop focusing on like doing the right thing and just try to kind of get it done? Like, what is that? What's behind that?
I think it's a measure of like a couple things. One, I think outcomes are incredibly hard to measure. And that's one of the reasons why we gravitate towards measuring progress on things like velocity and number of features you shipped and things that you can say, oh, I did it, check, right? Like not, oh, what did doing that result in? And those are really easy and they're very transparent things to actually measure. So sometimes we look to measure easy things instead of the right things. Like measuring your retention metrics is like a lagging indicator. It's actually something that takes like a really long time to put together. You have to do some science to figure out what retention actually means to us. How do we define retention? How do we measure retention? And then you got to wait long enough to actually see if people are retained after experiments.
Yeah.
So it's like, that's sometimes like longer term things. We can use leading metrics in product management to approximate if we're getting there, right? And that's by really digging into our data and figuring out like causation versus correlation type things and seeing if we can say, hey, we find that on average, people who participate in X, Y, and Z activities are more likely to be retained. We can measure that as a proxy, but we still want to measure retention. But again, that's harder to measure. Like you have to go in, you have to do the science, you have to do the study to actually figure out what those success metrics look like. So I think that's a big piece of it. Like we measure what's easy instead of what's right, because it's a lot of work to actually measure the right things. And I think there's more products out there in the market that are trying to help with that, trying to make it easier to measure those things. But it's still, a lot of times they give you the data, but they don't give you the calculations. So it is something that we still have to like spend some time on. So I think that's one piece. I do think there's like a bias as well towards like getting things done and checking it off the box, right? So when we wait to get those data and see if we're successful, like we can't, we have to wait, right? And if we actually ship things, it's like having a nice little checklist where you can cross it off. Like I love checking things off my list of things I need to do for the day. And I think we get that same feeling when we measure things by the number of features that we put out there. We're like, okay, we did something, right? And we trick ourselves into thinking that we're doing the right things. But we don't know if those actually resulted in stuff. So there's some of that bias as well. And I think it comes down to as well, like, how do you view, this is, I think, the critical thing for a lot of companies. How do you view software in your business? Is it just like a means to an end IT function that's like a cost center in the back end, in which case you're like streamline your costs, do all these different things, right? Or is it really a strategic part of growing your company? And I see a lot of companies just don't treat software like that, especially ones going through like digital transformations. They don't see, they'll say software is strategic, but they don't act like that. And they don't usually put it into the strategy conversations that they're having like on the business end. And with that mentality, right, it's just more of like, okay, monkeys, go do your job, right? Ship me some software, rather than like, what did this software do to move us forward? And I think that's a big culture and a big like mindset change for those types of companies too.
So it's a lot about output versus outcome, right?
Yeah.
And that's something what we also try to get across when we build one of these systems. So especially on Flight Level 2, that's a huge thing. Flight Level 2 is a lot about product services. So really the stuff that makes impact in the market somehow. And usually we try to approach it from this angle, that you have this something like released or something like this, a column which says something like this, but this doesn't mean that we're done. So we tend to add more columns like measure success, and then something like impact achieved. So there's always this like, so even when you build a system like this, we try to make people aware that there's way more going on until we have shipped some things. But I just said, okay, measure success. And I think that's somehow a tricky part, because when we are measuring success, people are somehow free. So they could just easily start new things. So how long are we measuring? How long do we have to wait? So it's always like, it's a tough decision, I think. And the other thing is, if we have something like measure success, budgeting, especially in large organizations, is really a thing. Like you ship the project and then we are done, right? But we're not done. So if we really think in outcomes, this totally disrupts the entire budgeting process of large corporations. So what have you experienced in this space?
Yeah, I literally had that conversation with somebody this morning too. It's like, how do we budget? Or last night with a big organization, and they were like, this wouldn't work with our budgeting. I'm like, no, it wouldn't. What I'm describing. And it's like, I think what you're describing with the budgeting in large organizations, it's like a legacy budgeting system, usually from non-software organizations. I find that larger, kind of more modern software organizations, your Googles of the world and stuff like that, they don't budget like the banks do, right? Like they're not budgeting per project like that. They're like funding teams and letting them go. And to me, that's a big shift that you have to like take. We really budgeted when I work with companies. Like we try to budget on a portfolio level of like where are we going to put our investments, based on what's going to manifest towards a strategy. So like, are we investing in, Horizon 1, Horizon 2, Horizon 3 type things? Then we're aligning the teams towards that investment. And then we're kind of finding out what could we actually produce from there. And if we do have a strategy to like build something new or there's like a great opportunity, then you have the conversation around like, what would it be to fund a team to go explore that? And then once you have that kind of business case proven through experimentation, it can justify whether you should make a change in budgeting or you approve that. And I now work on, I now sit on boards. So I sit on a board of a software company. And like, these are conversations that we have on the board where we're like, okay, we'll approve the funding if you can come back and tell us there's an amazing business case that's going on here too. And I think that's like an important thing to know. It's like, you don't have to be so stuck, I think, in these types of budgeting cycles. Like there's other ways to do it, but I think a lot of companies have been doing it, the McKinsey accounting method for so long that they don't know how to get out of that or think about different ways to actually fund these teams.
I think that's such a huge thing because I see that as that like the sort of I think part of it is as the company grows, but also as it ages or as the processes kind of evolve to maybe being a bit more about risk avoidance and kind of the structure, you somehow lose some of that connection to what is the strategic intent, as you talk about in your book. What is the purpose behind the thing that we're doing? And so you have teams that were spun up to do something, or you have departments that exist to fulfill a function that's maybe just slightly drifted off course from what it was originally intended, or people just, it was defined long before they even arrived. And so we don't really know why it is that we do these things. And so it's very easy, I think, in that space to sort of slip back into a situation where it's like, well, what we do is we get whatever bureau ticket got assigned to us, we get it done, and then we move on to the next thing. And as long as we get paid or we deliver enough of those things within scope or budget, we get a bonus at the end of the year. And so at some level, like, you're reinforcing that by getting recognized. Like, I got promoted because I delivered this amazing project. What did we achieve by it? I got a bonus. That's the point. Like, fantastic. And I mean, early in my product management career, I actually even had this happen. And it was kind of like, I was sitting there looking at, this is absurd. I got this massive bonus for delivering something that was objectively, like, you could look at it and go, yeah, we shouldn't have done that. And that's kind of weird. You just, but what do you do next time around? Like, you're like, well, we got to deliver on scope and budget, and, otherwise I don't get a bonus. And
that's like a big, that is a big issue. And it's one of the first things I look at when I come into organizations. Like, I feel like I can diagnose an organization now in like 10 minutes because I just see the same patterns over and over again. It's funny because when I give talks, everybody's like, that's us. How do you know that it's us? And I'm like, it's you and everybody else. Like, it's not, we all think like we're special snowflakes in these companies, but I've seen the same patterns over and over and over again. And like that reward system is one of the first ones that I would flag. I had one team when I came in and did an assessment with them, and I asked them, like, how are you judged for success? And they're like, yeah, it's on shipping features. And you want to know what we do? We know it's not right, but that's how we get our bonus. Just like you said, Cliff, like it's, we know it's not right, but every December we rush to get everything done. We ship it by the end of the year. And then January, after we get our bonuses, we pull it all back apart and actually do it right.
Perfect.
And I'm like, great, fantastic. So there's one problem that we can actually fix. And they were like, yeah, that's how it's been. And they're like, we have a bunch of stuff out there. You can tell, like, when everything's committed to code in December, like, it's just going to be junk. So like anything you see that hasn't been updated since December, in our code base, it's awful. So I think that's like one huge red flag, is those incentives. And I see this a lot as well in large companies when I do digital transformations as well. Like, there's companies that I try to describe them as like software native companies that came out of like a software mindset, and a lot of these were the growth stage companies that I was recently working with, where they started as a software company. They know software. They could be in an industry that's not, based in software, like an insurance company or whatever. But like the mindset of the company is like, this is how we build things. We're tech first. And then you've got your companies going through digital transformations, and I call them more like tech enabled. I don't know if it's the best word, but like there's a difference between tech enabled, I think, too, like where you have your business is not software, you're not a SaaS company. But then there's also the digital transformation on top of that. And in those companies, I think it's so interesting because they're like, I want to get out of the bill trap. I want product managers. I want to do this correctly. I want all of these things from the leadership. And then you go in and you train all the teams and you help them understand it. And then they get stuck. And then the leadership's like, why are they stuck? And I'm like, it's because you didn't incentivize your middle management to actually want to work this way. They're still being judged for success in the ways that they used to be. And that is almost always one of the biggest roadblocks I've seen in larger companies to like adopting this mindset and culture is like we still judge everybody for success on like outdated methodologies instead of updating them and rewarding them for the behaviors that we actually do want to see.
Yeah. There's a question in the chat actually that I wanted to ask. Rita Goodbody is asking. It sort of connects a little bit back to what we were talking about a few seconds ago. But she says, when is the point where you should say that it's time to change or do something different? So I mean, I get kind of two ways you look at the question. It's like, as a company, when should we change? But I think maybe the question was specifically like within the context of a team. How do you know, or how do you decide if your direction is just not like, we have to wait a while to get some results often, but how long is too long? When is too short, kind of thing?
Yeah, I mean, there's no like set answer for this. It's not a blanket statement. But what I think you need to do is you have to go back to the data to be able to answer this question correctly. So like every test that you run, every hypothesis that you test, every product that you put out there, it's to change behavior, right? Like you're trying to see some kind of behavior or some kind of metric change. And then what I would look at is like, what does that look like to get that data to be able to tell if there's any measurable change? Like how long does it take? And in some companies, it's like, it could take like a really long time to see any of that change. So then you have to ask yourself, is there a way for us to get signals to reduce the risk earlier? And that's where we bring the experimentation in, the user research in, and the things that can mitigate this risk so that we can feel more confident about placing that bet, because we do know that it's going to take a while to actually go see it. So sometimes you can't know for a long time. And in larger companies or slower industries and stuff, that's the case. And I think it's your job as a product manager instead to flip that then and go, all right, what can I do to learn faster now to de-risk that bet that we're going to have to make? That can tell us if we're getting the right signals. And is it a perfect one-to-one relationship? No, but it will help. And then in the situation where you might be able to control some of that, like you're taking the data, you're working backwards and you're saying, all right, like realistically then, how much do I need and who do I have to target to get X, Y, and Z data? And what date will I be able to actually know? And that can help you set that time frame. And if that date blows out of the water, then like it's time to actually change. I think one of the ones too, it's interesting, like you can tell, you can kind of sense when things are not working as well. And this took me a really long time to get comfortable with. And I think this comes with experience and it comes with like getting there. But I remember like I was running a bunch of experiments earlier on at this company, and it was kind of like, we were having a really hard time getting in touch with customers. So we kind of said, okay, instead we'll just like A/B test stuff and try to get the feedback and see what works. And we were having trouble getting in touch with customers because we didn't have any of their information. It was a B2C company and people were coming to the site. So we decided A/B test things. And like after 2 weeks, we tried a bunch of stuff. We got tons of traffic and nothing changed. Everything was flat, 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 flat. That's going to tell you like, I'm testing the wrong thing, right? Like what is the problem I'm actually going after? And then we really stepped back and said, no, we're not going to be able to actually solve this intelligently without really talking to the customers and trying to figure out how to get the information that we need to figure out what the problem is. Because we're not solving any problems the way that we're doing this right now. But you can kind of go down that path sometimes and just be like, no feedback, nothing's working, and then you're like, something's off, and that tells you like you have to kind of go investigate a little bit more, and you might not really understand what the problem is.
How is this actually somehow tied to the strategy, the work that you're doing? I mean, we need to have something like a company strategy, right? And when we have a company strategy, we want to, I don't know, dominate the Latin American market or something like this. So we come up with some ideas how to get there. We define some outcomes that we want to achieve, and then we run some experiments, right? But there might be the situation that even the strategy is wrong. So how can we build this feedback loop in?
So what we're
what's the
basically
problem?
doing, yeah, when we set strategy like that, what we are doing at that level is basically running those experiments and trying to figure out which way to go. So usually the conversation starts with like I'm just going to give a very common example of one of the strategies that I've worked on like a million times. Take a growth stage company, got 250 to 300 employees. You've been solving problems for small and medium businesses, and you look at the opportunity, you look at the market, you pull in, a lot of this is kind of like MBA science type stuff. I'm also not an MBA. It's just like things I learned along the way, but I teach MBAs. I don't have an MBA. It's fine. But it's like, it is some of those things that, they learn, which is like,
thing, funnily enough.
Yeah.
No MBA, but I've lectured multiple times to MBA classes, and people are like, "So when did you get your MBA?" I was like, "I didn't." Like I
was like, they may have like, they learned some really, I was like, they learned some really cool things. I'm like, I'm jealous. I'm like, I don't want to go to that class. That sounds fun, but I don't want to go back to school. So I'd rather just go to school. I don't want to be in it. I was not good. I'm not a good person with like authority and like that type of stuff. So I was like, I don't want to you tell me how I have to act here. So tests. I don't like tests. I'm like, I'll do projects every day. I love group projects, but don't give me a test. But so like there, when you're figuring out the strategy, like you're looking at where are the opportunities and where are the gaps in the market to go after. So part of that is like just good hard data and research and competitive analysis and all the stuff that we kind of take for granted is part of product management, because we talk a lot about the processes and we talk a lot about experimentation, but like these are the types of things that we forget about when we just lean too heavily on agile processes. It's like you do have to do a competitor analysis. You do have to understand like what's not working in your competitors, so that you have an opportunity to fix it. You have to figure out like what other technologies are out there that you could possibly utilize to get more value out of your company. Where are the market trends going? Like, are people going towards wearables? Are they going towards like can you use blockchain for something? I don't know. But like where's the opportunities, right? And that comes from studying the market. Then you're talking to your customers, right? And you're getting feedback from sales, you're getting feedback from your user research, and you're hearing about where their problems are. You're studying what they're doing. You're watching how their businesses are growing. You're seeing like where the opportunities are there. And then you're taking the results of experimentation and data and revenue and cost and all those things. And you're basically taking all that and going, we could go this way. And you're trying to like make an educated guess about which way to go. And now you got to see if that's the right way to go. So it's you first start with data, and we go something like, okay, we've been solving problems for small and medium businesses. We have a couple choices on what to do now. We can either solve adjacent problems, we can expand geographically, or we could go up market. And then you're evaluating which one of those strategies actually works for you from a perspective of like, what are we capable of doing? What do our customers actually want? And that's where we're going to take a small team and go like run experiments, see if they have adjacent problems that we could possibly solve, or we're going to go do some business development with enterprises and see like what their issues are and if they're interested in our product and if we can customize it for them and find like this whole new line, right? So we're experimenting at higher levels at that point. And that's how we kind of test that strategy and pressure test it to see if we have the feedback to do that.
Nice. This aligns so much with actually what we are thinking and teaching within Flight Level. So because if you want to do something like this, you need to have like a fast feedback loop to the strategy system, right? To the people who are doing the strategy, because otherwise it's just like crazy because you cannot react, right? Usually when I set up one of these Flight Level 3 strategy boards and we're like talking about, okay, makes sense that we have a stand-up meeting in front of this board. And so guess what the frequency is, what people often think, what they want to do a stand-up meeting, like on a quarterly basis. Each and every 3 months, we're having a stand-up meeting in front of the strategy board. Yeah. So this doesn't make any sense. But this is really like somehow hardwired in like this, as you said, non-IT like thinking.
Yeah, I don't get that. Like like strategy to me takes input from the entire organization, right? Like in order to do it well, like you have to, and especially like as a product leader or a tech leader or something, like when you're working with all the rest of your C-suite, like you are in touch with sales, you're in touch with finance, like you're sitting down with your CFO, you're going through your data. Like I have looked at more financial stuff than I possibly ever thought I would be looking at as a tech person in the last like couple years. And it's because that's the outcome, right? For the business is all that stuff. So you have to get really smart on that. But then you got to go into the teams and you have to be like, all right, like what's the result of what we're working on? What's showing promise? What's showing us leaving? Like, where are we getting churn? Where are people not adopting features? Why are they not adopting these features? Does that lead to like a bigger problem that we didn't see from a strategic standpoint, right? And that type of feedback is like really important. And that's kind of where we like, I've been on this kick of introducing like product operations into organizations, because getting that feedback is so essential to setting strategy, but it's not easy to get. And that's where, when I've done product transformations at scale, set up product management organizations at scale, that's where we put in those teams like product operations, because what they do is they get all the data about the successful and failed experiments and the success metrics and the outcomes, and they're measuring stuff like churn, and they're measuring stuff like feature adoption and all those things over and over again. And they're putting it into a way where we can all consistently look at it as a product team and say, like, is our strategy working, right? Or do we have the data to show that? And combining that as well for like with user research and with customer research. But like, that's to me is like a critical part of being able to get this information that you actually need, especially at scale, to make the decisions that we're talking about.
Maybe I throw in one more thought, if that's okay, Cliff. Sorry, but it's like I think when we talk about strategy, we're talking about the future, and if there is something which is uncertain, then it's for sure the future. That's the thing that we actually don't know. So in my point of view, it totally makes sense that we exactly at this, when we're talking about these things, that we have very high frequency of feedback loops. But in companies, it's actually the other way around. They are thinking like, okay, the strategy is something like for the next 5 years. So it's okay if we check in on a yearly basis. But the thing is, that's the thing what's changing all the time. And in other companies where it's now sexy to do business agility, the controlling department, who is basically doing like, there's not so much certainty in there like in the strategy domain, but they are somehow forced to do daily stand-up meetings. This is such a mixed world. I don't understand it. Sorry.
Exactly. Yeah. Because it's like, for what end, right? Like when you look at some of those types of motions or activities that people are doing, you're like, who's it benefiting? And what are you using this information for? And how is it going to help you make a decision near term, right? Like where does it go to? It's really interesting, though. I think we try to gravitate towards, again, it's like doing something that's easy rather than doing the right thing.
Exactly.
What can we do? Oh, we'll do a stand-up meeting. Check. Like, talk about our strategy, move on, right? And that's where I see that. It's like, okay, we can cross that off the list. We've already got that out of the way.
Yeah. I think one of the problems that I see in this space often is that it's the same thing, whether it's a digital transformation or it's the company strategy or whatever it is this kind of thing of thinking that all of that work is just about envisioning a future. So it's sort of this visionary, imagine whatever it could be. The problem with that, I find, is that it's very often not so much grounded in the reality of what's actually happening. So several realities that need to be taken into account. One is, what are your competitors doing? What is your company currently doing? What can it do? And what direction are those things moving in? So I see it so often that people are just like, yeah, we came up with some visionary thing. And I mean, people throw out names like Steve Jobs as if he was somehow like able to forecast the future. It's like he's looking at the
You got it.
data and seeing
Yeah,
this is
they
what's
have
going
so
to
much
emerge.
data.
Like,
Do you know, like,
it's
so
not
many
a
of our
crystal
MBA
ball.
Exactly.
Yeah. Like,
Yeah.
so many of our MBA students did internships at Apple, and I know a bunch of people who were product managers at Apple, and like that place is tight-lipped. You don't hear about the secret sauce in Apple because they have ridiculous confidentiality agreements. They're not allowed to talk about it with their spouses. Like, but they're testing stuff, right? Like that's what they do. That's why they can't talk about it. They want you to make it seem like it's magic, but it's not. It's science. They're doing all those things there. Like it's just that you don't hear about it because nobody's allowed to talk about it.
And it's a lot of work. It's not just like, I'm enlightened, let's head this way.
Yeah. Yeah, they have it's a huge company. It's a bunch of people over there. And like, you know, it started with a vision from Steve Jobs, but he's not there anymore. So like it's not like there's another magic person walking around.
Wow. Yeah. There's a question actually a little bit earlier in the chat, right near the beginning. Wider Team is the name of the person, which is either a super rock star name, or I guess it's maybe a team of people who are watching in some form. But yeah, the question says, how do you adjust when your customer problems are changing faster than your product velocity? Which I think is, I guess there's sort of an implication in there that you somehow know what your customer problems are, which I think is sort of an interesting question to unpack. But I want to kind of kick it over to you and see, what do you think about the question and sort of that framing of, how well can we actually know what the customer problem is?
I'm like, what is happening to your customers right now where their problems are changing that fast? Or how long does it take you to ship a product is my first question with that, right? Like, is it like, are we talking years? Or are we talking about like months, right? If your customer problems are changing so often that it's like every day, every month, they're changing really rapidly, there's a different underlying problem than you think it is. It's not that their problems are changing rapidly unless something crazy is happening to them. And it could be that you like work for the government, seen this before, and like policies changing rapidly and you're like, oh my God, I have to like react. And that could be a situation. But like, let's just say this is a normal situation with a company where it's like, oh man, I'm realizing that my customers have all these other problems and all these different things and they're changing. To me, it's like, I don't know if you got to the root cause of what the problem actually was and you were solving for that. So they might be coming to you with more problems or different problems, but it's probably because you didn't solve the really deep problem there. And that's what I would say to like focus on is like, how do you drill into that and actually go to what the root cause is? Like you may have thought it was this problem, but it was actually like a problem over there.
I think it's also there's also this aspect of very often when we talk about problems or problem statements or requirements, this kind of thing, it's much more of a, I ask you, Melissa, what would you like, and then you tell me the answer. But that's somehow shifting the design responsibility onto you, that you somehow know what the solution to your problem is. But I think often in a product management space, people forget that part of our responsibility is actually to understand what the customer need is underlying their descriptions of the situation and their problem, not to just take what they said verbatim and say, the famous Henry Ford quote of, well, then we'd end up with faster horses. I think that's part of the challenge. Like, if you're just copying and pasting what your customer said, that's not really developing some sort of product strategy or even listening to the customer. I think we need to engage our brains and sort of think about, well, how could we solve this better? And to your point earlier about Apple, I think it's one of the things that they're really, really good at is finding things that we didn't even know were a problem and then shipping. And I know that this will probably set off some people because a lot of people either love Apple or hate them. They're a sort of incendiary topic, but the number of times that they ship something and I'm like, I didn't even know I needed that. That's amazing. And it's like, it's cool. So, sorry, you were going to say
what they're doing. Like they're observing like what we call latent needs, right? Like they're looking for a gap in the market that they can solve with technology. It's not something that's such a big problem right now. Like it's not in your face, like, oh my God, I can't pay my taxes type problem, right? Like and I need it in this second. They're looking at it going, what slightly frustrates people? And like, where is there an opportunity for us to use technology to solve it? And that's like a latent need. And a lot of customers, and especially if you work in some kind of B2B kind of transactional type software, I see this all the time. Like you go and you talk to your customers and you say, Tell me about your problems, or tell me about like what's going on with these things. And they're like, oh no, everything's fine. But then you observe them and you figure out they're using Excel instead of your product to like do things. And you're like, but why are you using Excel? And they're like, but they're not complaining about it, right? Like they're not calling you and being like, I have to go through Excel. They're just like, oh, that's just the way it is. All of these tools suck, right? And they seem like it's not really like a crazy need, but then you fix it and they're like, oh my God, like I just saved 40 hours of my week. Like this is amazing.
Yeah.
So a lot of people accept it to be like, that's just the way it is. And you kind of have to observe them to really figure out like, is there a problem that could be solved here? And I think that's like what Apple does in those situations.
I like Klaus actually found the question.
Yeah.
I had it on the screen a second ago. Maria
Yeah.
I thought that Melissa is going to answer this, so but
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
the
what about
question
the
there,
product strategy? Okay.
because
Yeah,
we were talking about
specifically
business to
yeah.
business, so I was like, okay, maybe.
I think a lot of organizations have that, where the context of the experimentation pace is maybe a little bit slower or more difficult because the organizational mindset
Yeah.
is not necessarily geared towards that or something like that. So, yeah, how do you handle something in this situation?
Yeah. In this situation, your biggest friend in a B2B space for experimentation is going to be smaller beta groups that you cultivate to test and get qualitative feedback in real time. That's going to be the fastest way that you can actually do the experiments. I think in B2B, we try to rely on data too much, and we try to do like A/B tests and stuff like that. And that's not the right tool in that situation to get faster feedback. When I was working with this healthcare company, we used to run alphas and beta tests for all the new things that we were putting out there. We had doctors and nurses on it. So like to get the data back that we were going in the right direction really early on, it would have taken releasing stuff, possibly like screwing up workflows that had people's health on the line and not knowing if people liked it. So instead, what we're doing is we're going to like 5 different hospitals, taking like a team from each, bringing them in, being like, we're going to release these features to you. You're going to give us feedback on them over the next like 4 weeks. We're going to iterate on it. Then we're going to scale it to another 5 teams and see if that's working for them, right? And we're taking that slower approach to rolling things out, but working with a smaller team to get qualitative feedback to see that we're going in the right direction. But at the end of the day, we're also going to measure those lagging indicators too, to make sure retention's up or feature adoption's up and those types of things. But I think those are your best friends when it comes to experimentation in a B2B context, rather than trying to do things that are pure data play that you need tons of users for, tons of data for, tons of like statistical significance that goes into it. It's just not going to be the right tool to use in that situation.
There's another question in the chat actually that sort of extends a little bit around some of these kind of questions. So Fernando Alexo, if I say this correctly, and I love that he's starting with "Dear Melissa." It's almost like he's been listening to your podcast, perhaps. For those of you who don't know, Melissa runs a podcast, Dear Melissa. You can very easily Google it. I can find the link in a second and stick it in the chat, but check it out. So the question here is, how can we influence sales marketing leaders, and I guess by extension is kind of other leaders outside of the product and IT space, to look at new products and companies that are easily making their budgets and bonuses from mature cash cow products? Nice question.
Yeah. Okay. So how can we influence sales and marketing leaders to look at new products and companies that are easily making their budget and bonus mature and cash cow products? So I guess you're trying to get them to be excited about introducing new products. Well, the one thing is like, I'd look at, that's going to run out one day. You're going to saturate the market, especially if you're a market leader. And good salespeople will know that. Also, good salespeople are going to want to be the best. Like they stack rank salespeople. That's something to know. Like the way that sales organizations work and like in these companies, they're very ruthless. They're like, who's our top earner? You're going to go to Cabo for like the weekend. And like that's the mentality there. So a lot of them are striving to be the best. And if you can help them figure out how to be the best, right, they're going to come onto your side. So a lot of sales and marketing leaders concentrate on those because they know that they're easy wins. But what you have to do is kind of present your strategy in a way that shows them how they can get more by upselling these companion products or like looking at these new products over here, right? You want to get them excited about what you're rolling out so that it helps them achieve their goals. And their goals might not just be making their bonus. It might be something else. It might be differentiating themselves, or they might be going for a promotion, right? They might be trying to win over their team or get new team members. They might be trying to like change their organization. If you can dig into those goals, like on a personal level, that's usually where you get some more success than just concentrating on their bonuses. But you kind of have to talk to them and develop a good relationship with them to figure out what it is that drives them. And that's like one thing that I would do when I go into organizations, especially if I was like having a role in setting the product strategy or like playing the interim CPO like I did for a while. I go in and I like, you sit down with sales and you're like, just tell me what's going on. Like what's happening, right? The head of sales, you're like, where's it hurt? Right? Like what's broken? Like how's the product team doing? What's the feedback from the customers? And they will tell you, and they usually have a laundry list of things that's like really broken. And then you can ask them about how they feel about that, but then ask them about themselves. Like, where'd you come from? What's your goal for the year? Like, what are you hoping to do? Like, are you, just try to understand like who they are and what type of person they are, because that helps you pitch your things to them in a better way.
Before we take the next question, I want to quickly take an opportunity to remind everybody, if you're enjoying the conversation so far, hit like. It's the best way to give us feedback. The second best way to give us feedback is to ask a question in the chat. Of course, if you would like to stay in the loop about future episodes and these kind of events, hit the subscribe button. And additionally, I will also there is a meetup group if you prefer kind of the more calendar mode of invite. There will also be notifications and kind of you'll get reminders about the episodes as they come out. I will stick them in the chat in a second. Back to the conversation. After my little ad break, I feel like I'm sort of on an intermission. I watch like Twitch streamers and people kind of do this quick interlude thing and then go back to the content that you all came for. There's a question. Surya Tapa is asking, says, how long is too long to measure outcomes? And I guess what I'm curious about in this is that for me, in the software world, one of the things that people kind of think about is that they sort of tend to think in a very much kind of project sort of mindset. And in your book, you actually reference Joshua Arnold and some of his work about talking about like product delivery and kind of the, all the black swan farming kind of content that he has around cost of delay and so on. But I think partly for me, what's interesting here is that like once you've delivered something, it doesn't just like disappear. It exists until you shut it down. So I mean, in that sort of a world of software that lives forever until we delete it, or I mean, maybe then it even carries on living in the matrix in some form or another. But how long is too long to measure an outcome?
It's just like there's no hard and fast rule. I think everybody's looking for me to be like 2 months, but I don't have an answer for that. It depends on your business. How fast can you ship product? You can ship once a year. You're going to wait a long time to measure outcomes. Like, if you ship every week, like it's going to be shorter. So I think there's so many implications when it comes down to that question. It's like, one, what is the outcome going to tell you? At the end of the day, is it telling you like your whole business is going in the right direction? You're probably not going to get that feedback immediately. That's probably going to be like something that you can check in on a yearly basis, quarterly basis. Hopefully that would be preferable. But like, is this feature going in the right direction? I'm hoping that's more like on a monthly basis to like see if things are changing. But this all kind of like really comes down to how many people do you have to participate in that outcome? How fast can you get the data for that outcome, right? If you are just not able to get a lot of users or you don't have a lot of data, it's going to take a long time to measure those outcomes. And there's also, like I said at the beginning, there's also outcomes, and then there is leading indicators, right? Outcomes take a long time to measure. And especially if you're in a B2B software company where you do annual contracts, you're not going to see churn for a whole year. So like, that's something to know. Like usually you get maybe 3 months notice that somebody's going to churn, but like, you're still not going to know rapidly. It's going to be a year-to-year basis. That's just the nature of the business. So what do you do to predict churn? oh, that's where we do all those NPS surveys, and we go out and we talk to our customers and we check in with the salespeople to see if they're happy. We look at feature adoption to see if people are actually adopting new features. We look at how many users are actually signing up year over year, right? Like how many people are they adding to the account? Like all of those things are the leading indicators that help signal to us that the outcomes are on track. And that's what we have to look at is like, you should just measure outcomes, you gotta measure outcomes, but like you gotta measure the leading indicators that tell you you're on track towards those outcomes.
That's,
Yeah.
I mean,
I think
I
also-
want to
Cool.
throw in 3 comments. Like Toma is saying, okay, this is a great discussion, so many great ideas. And then there are 2 more comments which somehow go in the same direction. It's like, yes, great discussion, cool, but how can you influence actually your organization to move to outcome-based thinking? This is what Sylvia McDonald is asking. So especially if you are not in the leadership role. And there's a similar question from Rita, where she says, okay, very often people on flight level 1 and flight level 2, they understand what's the problem and everything, but how do you actually approach the people who are actually working with the strategy, to convince them that this change is needed? So great discussion, but how do we get there?
Oh man, I get asked this all the time. It's not going to be the answer anybody
What a
wants
surprise.
to hear. So this is the reality though.
So you have a 5 seconds answer. No,
Yeah.
just kidding.
It's like you need to walk the walk. You need to set the outcomes. Like just write them down. If nobody's got success metrics or goals, like make up a success metric and goal, and then go. Is this yes? Like do you want this? Do you want this type of increase in revenue? Oh, okay. You don't want that. Like, what is a good increase in revenue? And then you have those conversations, right? Honestly, I think if we just try to do it, they're going to react. They're going to be like, oh, that's not the right outcome though. Okay, what is the right outcome? I just took a guess because I wasn't sure. So tell me, right? Like you can go and you can ask them. And if they don't know or you can't get that information, just put something down and be like, this is what I was going off of, but am I right? I like ask them, like put it out there, just put something on paper. And so many times it just starts a conversation where it's like, oh, wow, I never even thought about it that way. Like I have so many product leaders where, and executives in these companies where the teams have no idea what the goals are or what the vision is or what strategy is. And it's not actually that there isn't one, it's that it hasn't been communicated. It's just stuck in someone's head. And then when you try to go, if you can't get time with them, right, you just put something down and you're like, this is how I understand the strategy. Is that right or wrong? They will react. They'll be like, oh, no, that's not it. And you're like, okay, help me clarify it, right? Like, where are we going here? What are we trying to do? And then
I love that.
you can start the conversations from there and then work backwards into what you're actually doing. I think just having the conversation is huge. I've seen so many teams and I get these emails all the time that are like, I went up to my managers and I went up to the executives and I told them we needed to change and I told them we were doing everything wrong and like that they need to be focused on this and we have to be doing this stuff. And some of them are receptive to that and they want to learn, but I haven't found that be super effective if you just go tell everybody like they're wrong and you need to change. What I see be effective is like if you start showing up and acting the way that you want other people to show, they're going to be like, oh, wow, that was really effective. Like, let's have a conversation about that. How do we actually change that? And you work with them and you empathize with them because you have to remember too, like these executives, especially if you're in a large organization where they've never done this before, product is not their job all day, every day. Like, especially your CEO, that's not their job, right? It's not your chief financial officer's job. It's not, your chief technology officer's job. Like they should be caring about this a lot, but like, it's your job, right? So they're not thinking about it the same way you are. So what they don't know sometimes though, is that what you need to be successful. So you need to go ask. It's not like, hey, you need to change your behavior. It's like, this is what I need from you so that I can figure out how to increase our revenue through these new features so that I can figure out how to reduce churn. I need to know what good looks like from you. So like, what's your top priority, right? Like, where are you trying to get towards? And if they say it's to ship X, Y, and Z, you say, okay, cool, fantastic, on board with that. What happens when we do that? Like, what do you want to see change so that I know that was successful? Like, what do you think that's going to do? Why'd you prioritize it? And that pulls it back out into what they were actually getting at. but they might not know how to explain that in the terms of outcomes and stuff. So it's kind of like you have to meet them where they are,
Sure.
and then just try to pull it out of them where you want to go. And then you take that back into your stuff and then communicate it the way it should be communicated back out to them.
I would just pick up on Craig Coburn is saying in the chat, accentuate the positive. And I like this. I've found this multiple times in many different engagements with different clients in different contexts, but finding the things that are working and trying to work with those things. So amplify the bright spots is the way that I often phrase it. Look inside the organization, see what's working well, and then try to do more of that. It's very rare that you'll find people from a change perspective responding well to being told what all the problems are. They already know a lot of problems. They're already very busy people. They're already probably frustrated with tons of stuff. You're not making anybody's life better by just highlighting the negatives. So really try to focus on what's working, what's positive. And as Melissa says, this approach of kind of mirroring this is the thing. Does this make sense to you? This is what I interpreted. This is what I understood. Walk the walk. I think that's a really great way. One other thing that I would just add on this that I think is interesting is that I often see folks, especially sort of in the mid to senior management space, they want to get excited about this stuff, or they get excited about these ideas. And it's the same whether they're doing something like introducing product strategy or adopting flight levels, or maybe they went to a talk and they heard about the Spotify model. And what they usually do is that they do this in a huge chunk. And for me, this is problematic because part of what we're trying to do in an agile way is actually pick a thin, small slice and find something like, how could we get a signal? And so often what I think can be helpful, and maybe this applies to a couple of the other questions, like how do we start, how do we measure? Do smaller things. Don't bet your career, bet your company, bet your entire quarter or your whole team on one thing that is, maybe works, maybe doesn't. That's a very risky bet to go all in, if you use the poker terminology, on every hand. You place a couple of smaller bets, you feel out, you learn a few things, and then you go, okay, that one's working. And then, as Craig says, accentuate the positive. I think this is kind of cool. So, yeah. Great. Cool. We are actually almost out of time.
That's true.
And before we close, I actually had one more closing question. And I just want to remind everybody again, YouTube actually tells me that somewhere around 85% of people who watch these Flight Club episodes are not subscribers. So one more shameless punt to say, hit the subscribe, hit the like button would be super cool. And we'd love to see you again in the future. Quickly, a closing question to you, Melissa. We've discussed a lot of topics here, product strategy, how do we escape the build trap? For those of us who are kind of starting out on a journey and we're sort of wondering, how do we get started? Like, what would be one thing that you would say is a great place to kind of kickstart that journey or start to build some kind of momentum in this direction?
Yeah, I think the easiest thing you could possibly do that has the biggest impact that I've seen is look at whatever you're building right now and set a success metric for it. Might be wrong, but at least just put like a line in the sand. And you can totally control it because it's what you're overseeing. And you just say, what do we think success looks like? And again, you can do the same technique with like, I put this down and go to your manager, whoever's in charge of your department, and be like, yes, good success metric, or bad. And then just starts a conversation. But I wouldn't worry so much about like, hey, we have to change all of our processes. We have to change everything we're doing. We have to get a strategy. We have to do everything. Like, just set a success metric for your thing, ship it, and then see if you hit it. Because that's going to start a whole conversation about, okay, if we didn't hit it, now what? And if we did hit it, yay, okay, what does that mean for what else we're doing, right? So I think it's just the easiest thing you could possibly do. It's something that you could control. You don't have to worry about like rewriting the whole agenda. And it just starts a conversation, especially if you miss it, because it's like, and you want to set like a good success metric, not just, it's not like an output one, but like an outcome focused one, leading indicators, all that stuff. And then have that dialogue and just get in the habit of doing that every single time, because it starts changing the way that people look at what you're doing.
Awesome. So I want to thank you for your time. It's been wonderful having this conversation, and it's been great to connect with you again. I also want to say thank you to everybody who's on the live stream and on the chat for all the wonderful questions. We've had folks from more countries than we've ever had. I think there's something like 60 countries represented in the chat, according to the stats that I'm looking at. Super, super cool. So thank you, Melissa. It's been wonderful to have this conversation with you again this evening, and I look forward to more of them in the future. Any
Great.
closing thoughts or something you'd like to say from either of the two of you before I say goodbye to everyone?
If you want to hear more, you have more questions for me, you could submit them to dearmelissa.com and I'll answer them on a future podcast. I'm actually about to go record one right now for 2 weeks from now. So get your questions in.
Cool.
Cool.
I've stuck the link in the chat so folks can find it easily. It would be cool to see a couple of the questions showing up in the podcast. Yeah. Cool.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Cool.
Well then,
Thanks,
thanks very much, everyone. See you again when you're older. It's been a lot of fun. Have a good evening.
Yes.
Goodbye.
Cool. Thanks, Melissa. Cheers.
Bye. Thank you.